The chandelier sparkled above him, but Richard Collins felt nothing. 50 years old, a billionaire in a custom Armani suit. Yet he sat frozen before a plate of untouched filet mignon. To anyone else, this was the pinnacle of success, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Le Pavon. The kind of place where power whispered at every table. But for Richard, it was a coffin made of gold. The chair across from him was empty, and that emptiness screamed louder than the piano echoing through the hall. 10 years ago, that chair belonged to Grace, his wife, his anchor, and beside her, their son Ethan, just 3 years old, laughing with a fork too big for his tiny hands. All gone. One crash, one night, twisted metal, shattered glass, and silence that never left him. Richard gripped the stem of his Bordeaux glass, staring at the red swirl as if it might bleed memories back to life. Billionaire, genius, mogul, the world envied him. Yet at this table, he was nothing but a man haunted by ghosts, choking on luxury, and starving for something money could never buy back. The glass was halfway to his lips when it happened. A simple movement, wine about to kiss his mouth, shattered by a sound that didn't belong. A voice, fragile and trembling, slipped into the velvet silence of Le Pavon. It didn't belong there. Not among the hushed conversations of diplomats and bankers, not beneath chandeliers that dripped with wealth, and yet it cut through the air like broken glass. Impossible to ignore. "Sir, may I have your leftovers?" Richard froze. The words didn't register at first. They seemed too surreal, too jarring, as if his mind had conjured them from some long-buried memory. For a heartbeat, he thought he had imagined it, that perhaps the grief he carried had finally started whispering illusions into his ear. But then he turned, and the illusion had a face. She was a girl, no older than 19. Her coat hung in tatters, threadbare and damp, its sleeves frayed where the lining had given up the fight. The fabric clung to her narrow shoulders like it feared the cold almost as much as she did. Strands of messy blonde hair, heavy with rain or tears, or both, framed a face that was too young to look so worn. But it wasn't her eyes that struck him first. It was what she carried. A baby. Nestled in her arms was a child no more than 8 months old. The little one's cheeks glowed pink from the autumn wind, his nose red from the chill that clung to the city streets. Yet his eyes, those impossibly clear, glowing eyes, were fixed not on the girl's struggle, not on the crowd of wealthy strangers gaping at them, but on the untouched plate before Richard. A steak, still steaming, its juices pooling beside a golden mound of potatoes. Untouched because Richard's appetite had long ago died with his peace. The room went still. Forks hovered inches from mouths, waiters stiffened mid-step. Crystal glasses froze in the air like ornaments suspended in time. The air itself thickened, as though the walls of Le Pavon refused to absorb the sound of hunger. No one asked here, no one begged here. The marble floors and velvet booths existed precisely to keep hunger out, and yet here she stood. But she wasn't begging. Not really. Richard could see it in her face, exhaustion carved into every line. Yes, but beneath it, something more primal, something fierce. She wasn't pleading for herself. She was a shield, a barrier, asking for the small, fragile life pressed against her chest. Amanda Parker. That was the name she would give him later. When the shock of this moment had settled into something far heavier, did not flinch under the weight of 100 stares. Men in tailored suits, women in silk gowns, pearls gleaming like small moons, all of them staring as though she had broken some sacred rule of separation between their world and hers. Yet Amanda didn't lower her head. She stood straight, her body trembling, but her arms firm around her child, as though she alone could keep the roof of the world from collapsing. Richard's chest tightened. For 10 long years he had lived in silence, haunted by shadows of people he had loved and lost, 10 years of empty glasses, half-eaten meals, and ghosts that pressed against him with every step. And now this slip of a girl, rain dripping from her coat, trembling but unbroken, daring to walk into the one place where hunger had no business existing. His hand shook, the glass quivered, but it wasn't anger that moved him. It wasn't even pity. It was recognition. A recognition so sharp, so undeniable, It cut through him like the very voice that had shattered the room only moments before. Richard pushed the plate forward. The gesture was small, almost careless, but what followed shattered him. Amanda didn't lunge at the food. She didn't tear into it like a starving wolf. Instead, she pulled a square of cloth from her satchel, clean but fraying at the edges, and laid it gently across the table. With the precision of someone handling treasure, she wrapped the steak and potatoes as though sealing gold. Then came the part that made Richard's throat burn. She knelt slightly, adjusted the baby in her arms, and retrieved a tiny plastic spoon from her coat pocket. Lucas's wide eyes followed every move. Amanda scooped the smallest portion, blew softly until the steam faded, and brought it to her son's lips. The boy opened instinctively. The moment the potatoes touched his tongue, he cooed, a bubbling sound of pure joy. His cheeks lit up like sunrise, his tiny hands patting Amanda's chest as if to say, "More, Mama, more." Richard's heart clenched. It was the same sound Ethan once made. Sitting in a high chair with mashed peas smeared across his chin, a sound he thought he'd never hear again. Around them, the restaurant remained frozen. The wealthy diners caught between disbelief and silence, but Amanda didn't see them. She didn't care. She fed Lucas one careful spoonful at a time, her hands steady, her face calm. There was no shame, no desperation, only devotion. And that, God help him, was more powerful than any fortune Richard had ever made. Richard didn't think. He just moved. One moment Amanda was walking out of Le Pavon, clutching her baby against the autumn chill, and the next, he was rising from his chair, leaving behind his untouched wine, the whispers of the rich trailing after him like smoke. The night air hit him cold and sharp. He followed her through the streets, past glowing boutiques and polished cars, until the glitter of the city thinned into cracked sidewalks and shadows. She never looked back. Her steps were steady, purposeful, as though this path was carved into her bones. At last, she stopped. Before her stood an old navy blue sedan, dented and rusted, its windows fogged from the breath of long nights. She opened the back door, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. And Richard realized the unthinkable. This was not her car. This was her home. His chest tightened. He stepped forward, raising his hands slightly. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I just wanted to see if you were safe." Amanda turned, her body tense, shielding Lucas instinctively. "You followed me." "Yes," Richard admitted, his voice low. "I saw the way you fed your son. I've never seen anything like it." Her jaw clenched. Silence stretched between them, until at last she whispered, "I don't need your money." Richard blinked. "Then, what do you need?" Amanda looked down at Lucas, his tiny chest rising and falling in the cocoon of her arms. Her answer came like a knife. "Just one day where he's warm, full, and safe. That's all." The words gutted him. Billionaire, genius, empire builder, and yet here was a girl asking for nothing but a single day of peace for her child. And in that moment, Richard knew this was no longer pity. It was recognition. Richard didn't sleep that night. The image of Amanda wrapping scraps like treasure and Lucas's smile burned behind his eyelids. By dawn, the billionaire who had once commanded empires found himself planning something far smaller, but infinitely greater. The next evening, a doctor arrived at the parking lot where Amanda's car sat like a coffin on wheels. He carried no logos, no clipboard, only quiet instructions. "A concerned friend asked me to check on the baby." Amanda bristled, suspicion flashing in her eyes, but when Lucas coughed, his tiny chest rattling, she allowed it. Medicine came next, tucked inside a plain brown bag. Then food, not lavish meals, but warm. Simple dinners delivered without signatures or expectations. And once, when rain lashed the city, a motel key slipped beneath her windshield wiper. No note, no demands, just shelter. At first, Amanda refused. She waited for the trap, the price, the unspoken debt, but none came. Each gesture arrived quietly, without Richard's name attached, as though kindness itself had decided to follow her. Days stretched into weeks. Amanda's eyes, once sharp with mistrust, softened, not into dependence, but into recognition. She began to see the truth. This wasn't pity. This was someone trying to give her what she had begged the universe for. Just one day where Lucas was warm, full, and safe. And for the first time in years, Richard felt alive. The fever came like a thief in the night. By dawn, Lucas's tiny body was burning, his breaths ragged, his cries weak. Amanda's panic turned into raw desperation as she rushed into the nearest emergency room, clutching her son like he was slipping through her arms. "Please," she begged at the front desk, her voice cracking. "He's burning up, 104 degrees, he can't breathe." The receptionist didn't even look up fully. "Do you have insurance?" Amanda hesitated. Her silence was answer enough. The woman's tone hardened. "We're at capacity. You'll have to wait or find another facility." Amanda's knees nearly gave out. "He's just a baby. Please, he's dying." Her voice shattered against the sterile walls. But no one moved. No one cared. Then the doors burst open. Richard stormed in like a force of nature, coat flaring behind him, eyes blazing. He didn't waste a second. Without a word, he scooped Lucas from Amanda's trembling arms. The boy's tiny hand curled weakly around his finger, and Richard felt it like a bolt of lightning. He strode to the counter, his voice cutting through the room. "I want a doctor, now!" The staff froze, recognizing the man whose face had been on magazine covers. The billionaire who built half the city's skyline. Authority radiated off him like fire. Within seconds, Lucas was whisked into an exam room. Amanda collapsed against Richard, sobbing uncontrollably. For the first time, she didn't fight, didn't resist. She leaned into his chest, her tears soaking his shirt. "You came," she whispered, broken. Richard wrapped his arms around her, steady and unyielding. "Of course I did." And in that moment, under the harsh glow of hospital lights, Amanda realized she wasn't alone anymore. The photo hit the internet before dawn, a grainy shot, taken on a phone outside the emergency room. Richard Collins, billionaire mogul, cradling a fevered baby against his chest while a young woman trailed close behind. Within hours, it was everywhere. News sites, gossip blogs, late-night talk shows. Tech titan saves child of homeless teen mom. Richard Collins, billionaire with a secret family. The mystery woman and the miracle baby. The headlines spiraled faster than truth could catch them. Amanda sat on the edge of a borrowed bed in the motel Richard had quietly arranged, Lucas sleeping beside her. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the avalanche of comments. Strangers dissected her face, her clothes, her worth. Some called her a gold digger, others a saint. Some accused her of trapping a billionaire, others painted her as the symbol of American grit. But all Amanda felt was fear. Fear that Lucas would grow up under a shadow of scandal. Fear that one day he'd search his name online and believe the lies. When Richard arrived that morning, he found her packing the few belongings she owned, 2 duffel bags and a worn baby carrier. "I can't stay," Amanda said, voice tight. This storm will eat us alive." Richard closed the door quietly, then crossed the room. His eyes were tired, but steady. "Amanda, listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong." Tears burned her eyes. "It doesn't matter. People will believe what they want. And Lucas, he'll suffer for it." For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Then, with a breath that seemed to scrape years off his chest, he spoke words he had buried for a decade. "I know what it means to lose everything. Grace, Ethan." His voice cracked, but he pushed through. "The night they died, so did I. I stopped living. I built walls, filled my life with noise and money, anything to drown out the silence." He looked at her then, not as a billionaire, but as a man stripped bare. "And then you appeared, not asking for wealth, not asking for favors, just trying to feed your son." His throat tightened. "In that moment, you gave me back something I thought I'd buried with my family. The will to live." Amanda's breath hitched. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the motel heater. For the first time, she saw not the mogul splashed across headlines, but a man carrying his own scars. Richard reached for her hand, rough and trembling. "Let them talk. Let them twist it. None of that matters. What matters is this. Lucas is alive, and you are not alone. Not anymore." Amanda's defenses cracked. She pressed a hand over her mouth, trying to stifle the sob that broke free. Richard pulled her gently into his arms, and for a fleeting, impossible moment, the noise of the world vanished. Two broken souls, stitched together by a baby's smile and a photograph gone viral, stood in defiance of the storm. Amanda didn't arrive with suitcases, only two battered duffel bags, a baby carrier, and the weary posture of someone who had spent too long surviving. Lucas clung to her chest as she stepped into Richard's penthouse for the first time. Marble floors, glass walls, a skyline that glittered like a crown, yet Amanda looked at it all with suspicion, as if it might vanish the moment she blinked. There were no promises exchanged, no labels spoken. Richard didn't call her family. Amanda didn't call him savior. They were simply two broken lives colliding under one roof, orbiting around a child who needed both of them more than words. The first night was chaos. Lucas cried endlessly, overwhelmed by a room too warm, sheets too soft, silence too foreign. Amanda tried, rocking him, whispering lullabies. Richard stood in the doorway, useless, hands shoved in his pockets. Finally, without thinking, he stepped forward. His arms were stiff at first, awkward, but Lucas's tiny body pressed against his chest with surprising ease. The baby's cries softened. Amanda stared. Richard shrugged, almost embarrassed. Guess he doesn't mind me. That was the beginning. Days blurred into small acts of learning. Richard fumbling with diapers, his expensive cufflinks clattering to the floor as he struggled with tape tabs. Amanda stifled laughter until he gave up and muttered, "These things should come with an instruction manual." He learned to warm bottles without scalding the milk. He learned the difference between Lucas's hungry cry and his tired whimper. One night, when Amanda collapsed from exhaustion on the couch, Richard took over, pacing the living room with Lucas draped over his shoulder. Hours passed until the boy finally slept, his tiny fist gripping Richard's shirt like it was life itself. In those moments, something shifted. This penthouse, once a mausoleum for Richard's grief, slowly transformed. Baby socks left on leather chairs, lullabies echoing against glass walls. Amanda's laughter, quiet at first, then freer, bouncing off marble floors. They never said what they were to each other. They didn't need to. It was in the way Richard stayed up through the night, memorizing Lucas's breathing. It was in the way Amanda, for the first time in years, allowed herself to exhale. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't planned, but for the first time in a decade, Richard wasn't alone, and for the first time ever, Amanda wasn't either. Love didn't come to Richard and Amanda with fireworks or declarations. It crept in like dawn, unnoticed at first, then impossible to ignore. It was in the mornings, when Richard stumbled into the kitchen to find Amanda already there, hair messy, making oatmeal while Lucas babbled in his high chair. She'd glance up, catch him watching, and shake her head with the faintest smile. It was in the nights. When Lucas woke crying at 2 a.m., Amanda would rush in, only to find Richard already there, pacing with the boy in his arms, whispering nonsense lullabies. She never mentioned it, but every time she saw them like that, something inside her loosened. They never defined what they were. Amanda didn't dare hope for a fairy tale. Richard didn't dare believe he deserved a second chance, but the house began to breathe differently. Her laughter filled the spaces once haunted by silence. His voice softened when he said her name. Lucas became the invisible thread binding them. His first steps were taken between Richard's open arms and Amanda's waiting hands. His first real laugh echoed across the penthouse, bouncing off glass walls like a promise. Richard felt it most in the small moments. The way Amanda brushed flour off his shirt when he failed miserably at baking cookies with Lucas. The way she fell asleep on the couch beside him, head on his shoulder, as the city lights glowed below. For Amanda, it was the way Richard looked at her, not as a charity case, not as a scandal, but as if she was the anchor pulling him back to life. No man had ever seen her that way. No man had ever chosen her without asking for something in return. It wasn't passion that defined them. It wasn't lust or grand gestures. It was persistence, presence, the quiet certainty that even if the world outside roared with rumors, inside these walls they were safe. And though neither dared say it aloud, both knew the truth. They were no longer surviving. They were beginning to live together. The envelope slid under the apartment door like an unwelcome ghost. Amanda stared at it for hours before touching it, her hands trembling when she finally unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her mother's. 2 years had passed since her parents had told her she was no longer their daughter. They had turned their backs when she needed them most, branding her as reckless, shameful, unworthy. Now, suddenly, there were words on a page asking for forgiveness, words Amanda wasn't sure she could trust. Richard found her at the kitchen table, eyes red, letter shaking in her grip. "It's from them," she whispered. "After all this time." He placed a hand gently over hers. "Amanda, you don't owe them anything, but maybe facing them could free you. Not for them, for you." She didn't answer, but 3 days later, Amanda stood in front of the small, weather-worn house she had once called home. Lucas squirmed in her arms, his small hands gripping her sweater as if sensing her fear. Richard lingered behind her, silent support, ready to step forward if she faltered. The door opened slowly. Her mother appeared, older, more fragile than Amanda remembered. For a long moment, the two women simply stared. Then her mother's gaze fell to Lucas. Her lips trembled, caught between fear and longing. The words barely made it out, fragile as a breath. May I hold him?" For a heartbeat, Amanda stood frozen. The room seemed to shrink, sound falling away, leaving only the echo of that plea, every wound, every scar etched by years of silence. Abandonment and unspoken anger screamed inside her to refuse. She wanted to clutch her son tighter, to keep him away from the arms that had once let her fall. The bitterness rose in her chest like a wave, threatening to drown her. But then, Lucas shifted. With the innocence only a child could carry, he stretched out his tiny hand toward the trembling figure before him. His fingers reached, soft and unknowing, bridging a gap that decades of pain had carved. That simple, instinctive movement cracked something inside Amanda, like sunlight breaking through a shuttered window. It was as though her son had seen what she could not. That love, even when buried under years of hurt, still had the power to rise. Her breath caught. Her arms tightened once, reflexively, around her son's small frame. Then, with a slowness that felt like surrender and courage all at once, Amanda extended her arms forward. She placed Lucas gently into her mother's waiting embrace. The older woman gasped, as though she had been handed the very substance of time itself. She cradled him with a reverence that bordered on desperation, pressing him to her chest as if anchoring herself to the one chance she feared she would never have again. Her sobs broke the silence, raw and unrestrained. Tears fell into Lucas's soft hair, dampening the baby blue blanket that Amanda had so carefully wrapped around him that morning. "I'm sorry," she whispered, over and over. The words tumbled from her lips, each one cracking open another chamber of grief. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her voice trembled with the weight of years, apologies that had never been spoken, regrets that had been buried under pride, choices that had stolen more than she could ever give back. Lucas blinked up at her, wide-eyed and unburdened. He didn't know of broken promises or fractured bonds. He didn't recognize the shame carved into the lines of the woman who held him. To him, she was simply another face, another source of warmth, another pair of arms to trust. His tiny fingers grasped her necklace, tugging it gently, and in that innocent tug, there was something like grace, something that whispered the past could be rewritten, if not erased. Amanda's knees weakened, buckling under the enormity of the moment. For so long she had held the fortress of her heart intact, refusing entry, convinced that to forgive was to betray herself. But as she watched her mother cradle her son, as she heard those broken apologies mingle with her baby's steady breaths, she felt the walls begin to fall. Not all at once, but enough to let in a flicker of light. She swayed, unsteady. And then she felt it. Richard's hand, firm, steady, pressing against the small of her back. His touch grounded her, pulling her back from the whirlpool of anger and sorrow that threatened to consume her. She turned her face slightly, her eyes meeting his. In them she saw no judgment, no pressure, only quiet strength. The kind that told her she wasn't alone in this battle. Amanda inhaled shakily, her chest rising against the storm inside her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of forgiveness. Not the kind that erased history or denied the pain, but the kind that allowed wounds to begin healing, no matter how deep. It wasn't just forgiveness for her parents. Though the thought of it still ached like pressing on a bruise, it was forgiveness for herself, for the choices she had made in anger, for the moments she had let fear guide her, for the years she had lost carrying a burden that wasn't meant to be carried forever. In that fragile moment, Amanda realized something she had never dared admit. Forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was the strength to stop letting the past define the present, the strength to say that love mattered more than resentment, and that healing could begin with one brave choice. Her mother held Lucas closer, whispering her litany of apologies into the soft crown of his head. Amanda didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. The act of handing her son over, the act of staying in the room instead of walking away, was already its own reply, and as Richard's hand remained steady against her back, Amanda lifted her eyes once more. For the first time in years, she didn't just see the ruins of the past, she saw the outline of a future, fragile, uncertain, but possible. A future where forgiveness wasn't an abstract dream, but a living choice. A future where love, though scarred, could still endure. And in that moment, Amanda let herself believe. That night, laughter returned to the house that once held only silence. It was awkward, imperfect, but it was real. And as Amanda watched her mother rock Lucas by the firelight, she knew the truth. Wounds may scar, but some families can be stitched back together, one trembling embrace at a time. 1 year later, beneath blooming trees in the park, Richard knelt with a simple ring. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. But before she could answer, Lucas wobbled forward, threw his arms around Richard's leg, and shouted, "Daddy!" The world seemed to hold its breath. What began with a whisper for leftovers had become love, redemption, and the miracle of a family reborn. From a single whisper for leftovers came love, redemption, and a new family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful life stories that inspire and move us all.